Hi, it's Ms. Trevino, and I'm going to go over the answers for the 2020 Pre-AP Biology Midterm Study Guide. I'm only going to go over Units 2 and 3 in this video, and then I'll go ahead and make more videos for the other units. So we start off with Unit 2, which is Taxonomy and Classification. And number 1 says to describe the difference between prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. Well, the main difference is that prokaryotic cells have no nucleus, and eukaryotic cells do have a nucleus. They also have membrane-bound organelles. Those are going to be your mitochondria, chloroplasts, smooth and rough endoplasmic reticulum. So prokaryotic cells do not have those organelles, only eukaryotic cells do. So there is a saying to help you remember this. Pro means no, meaning no nucleus. And if you're a euc, you have a nuke, meaning you have a nucleus. Number 2 says to select the correct answers in the following statements. Something can use sunlight to make its own food. Well, that's autotrophs. Autotrophs can use sunlight to make their own food. While something must consume food to survive. Well, that's heterotrophs. Plants are autotrophs, and again, they can use sunlight to make its own food. Heterotrophs are like us, humans, or other animals. They need to eat to survive. C, which cell type is only composed of one cell? Well, the key word is one, and that prefix is for uni. Uni means one cell. Multicellular means many cells. Number 2, complete the chart comparing the 6 kingdoms. We have Archaebacteria, Eubacteria, Protista, fungi, plantae, and Animalia. Out of all of these cells, only 2 of them are prokaryotic, and those are your 2 bacteria kingdoms. So Archaebacteria and Eubacteria are both prokaryotic cells. The rest, Protista, fungi, plantae, and Animalia, are eukaryotic. So only Archaebacteria and Eubacteria, they're the only ones that do not have a nucleus, while all the other kingdoms do have a nucleus surrounding the DNA. So unicellular or multicellular? Well, Archaebacteria and Eubacteria are both unicellular. They're only composed of one cell. Protista can be both unicellular or multicellular, but most of them are unicellular. Fungi can also be both. And then plantae and Animalia are only multicellular. Autotrophs are heterotrophs. Archaebacteria can be both autotrophic or heterotrophic. So can eubacteria. We have some of the bacteria that can use sunlight for its own energy, and then we have some bacteria that needs to eat to survive. The same thing goes with Protista. They can also be both. Fungi are heterotrophic only because they have to eat other organisms to survive. They're the decomposers, so they need to feed on something else to survive. Plantae is autotrophic because it can make its own energy. And Animalia is heterotrophic because, again, it needs to consume food to survive. Number 8, name the 8 levels of the classification system in order from least specific to most specific. We start with domain, then we have kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and lastly, species. So the least specific is domain because it carries a lot more organisms. As you go down this classification systems, those organisms become narrow and narrow. And species is the most specific classification system. Remember, there's a saying to help you remember this order. You could come up with your own, or you can use the one I use. Dear King Philip came over for good soup. Remember, acronyms are really helpful so that way you can remember the order when you're taking your test. Number 4, according to the system of binomial nomenclature, what two parts of the classification make up the scientific name? That's going to be the genus and the species. Those two always make up the scientific name. Remember, when you write these out, genus is always going to be capital, so the first word will always have a capital letter, and species will always be lowercase, so the second word is going to be lowercase. Remember, these are Latin or German-based words. You're going to italicize them when you type them out, so they'll be italicized. If you're writing them out, we don't expect you to know how to write your words in italics, so you can just underline them. But when you're writing them out, the first word, genus, still has to be capital, and the second word, species, still needs to be a lowercase letter. Number 5, what are the advantages of using a scientific name over a common name? Well, it's very easy and effective. I understand using Latin isn't as easy, but it's easy and effective for scientists to communicate with each other all over the world. And it's mainly for the ones who identify and study organisms. Common names for animals are different depending on which country you're from, depending on which language you use. But if you have a standard scientific name, that means no matter what country you're in, that scientific name will be the same for that organism. So it's easy for scientists to know exactly which animal they're talking about, rather than using common names like a clam or a raccoon. Now we're going to go to Unit 3. We're going to use the food web to answer these questions. At which trophic levels is/are the frog? Well, let's start off by looking at the first level, which is the primary level. I'm sorry, the first level is producers. Algae would be the producers, and the ones that eat it are going to be the primary consumers. And the ones that eat it are the beetle and the clam. The organisms that eat these primary consumers are called secondary consumers. So we go from the algae to the beetle to the frog or the dragonfly. So the frog can be a producer, primary, secondary consumer. Because that's the third level. But if you're paying attention, the algae, the beetle, the dragonfly, the frog also eats the dragonfly. So it can be producer, primary, secondary. It could be a tertiary consumer as well, if you're following that food chain. So it can be secondary, but it can also be tertiary, which is the fourth step, fourth level. That's really all it can be. Just remember how to read a food web and a food chain, and just remember the levels when you're studying this. What would happen if all the frogs died? Well, two things can happen. The first thing is that since frogs eat beetles, and if there's not enough frogs to eat the beetles, well, then the beetle population would start to increase. Oops. The second thing that would happen, since the snakes and raccoons both depend on the frog, they would start to decrease because they're losing their food source. The snake would feel it more because it directly eats the frog, but the raccoon would also feel it because, yes, it does eat a frog. Number 7, what happens to energy as it is transferred to each trophic level? So this follows the 10% rule, and that's the 10% rule for each trophic level. And that 10% rule states that only 10% is carried to the next, next level. And that's because the other 90% is going to be lost by body heat from those organisms. So again, only 10% is carried to the next level. So that means if your producers start off with 1,000 joules of energy, primary consumers would only get 100, secondary consumers would only get 10, tertiary consumers would only get 1%. That's the 10% rule. Number 8, bacteria and fungi are going to act as decomposers in the environment. And by that, they're going to eat up all the dead matter, all the decay of those organisms in the food web or the food chain. So out of all of these organisms here, the bacteria and fungi are going to eat up all of the dead parts, the dead decaying parts. Number 9, what role do bacteria have in the nitrogen cycle? Remember, nitrogen gas takes up most of the atmosphere, but we cannot use nitrogen gas. It's not usable for us. So what the bacteria does, we have special nitrogen fixing bacteria. And what they do is they help convert the nitrogen gas into usable forms. They're going to eat up the gas. They're going to produce usable forms of ions, of nitrogen ions, for the plants to use, for the animals to consume, and so forth. Number 10, describe different ways that humans have impacted the environment. When we describe these ways, we often use the acronym HIPCO, and that stands for H is habitat, destruction. Again, humans like houses. We love to build houses so we can have a place to live. But unfortunately, when we do that, we are destroying the habitats of other organisms. The same thing goes for humans making buildings, even beavers making dams. They're disturbing the habitat for the fish. All right, B is I, and that stands for invasive species. So invasive species means non-native. So humans tend to bring non-native species into habitats where they don't belong. They're not from there. And because of that, they don't have any known predators, so they might start to overpopulate. And if that new species starts to overpopulate, well, it starts to eat all the food that is there for the other animals that are from there. So now we have native animals fighting for food resources from the invasive species. P is population growth. Um, Again, humans are increasing their population, and this is causing an increased use of the resources. So more humans means more food that needs to be produced for those humans. So we're going to require more produce, we're going to require more meat, more animals. That's what population growth means. The second P is for pollution. Humans love nice cars. Of course, those cars are producing more and more carbon dioxide in the air. We also like things made quickly. We love things that are made fast. So we have factories that use a lot of material to make our products for us. And again, those companies are polluting the air as well with their factories. C stands for climate change. Because we're putting so much pollution in the air, we're increasing the overall heat of the earth, and especially because we keep digging and digging to the center of the core. So we're causing a climate change, and that is bad for the atmosphere. And finally, O is for over harvesting or over exploitation. Overexploitation means we're hunting and fishing beyond our needs. So we're not leaving enough animals out there for the other animals who eat the animals we're hunting and fishing. Over harvesting, again, we're just over plowing. We're gathering too much produce, even though we don't eat it. Sometimes it just sits in our fridge and then we end up throwing it away. So, again, those are the different ways that humans have impacted the environment. Number 11, we're going to fill out about interactions of organisms. I'm not going to highlight, I'm just going to delete the ones that don't belong. So mutualism is when both organisms benefit. They're helping each other out. So those are going to be our two positives. Again, they're helping each other out. Both are benefiting in some way. Commensalism is when one benefits and the other is neither helped nor harmed. Kind of just doesn't care that that other organism is there. So that's going to be our positive and our neutral zero. Parasitism is usually when a parasite feeds on a host, and when it does that, it causes the host to get really weak, sometimes sick, sometimes it causes it to even die. So that's going to be a negative relationship, negative positive relationship. And again, one's benefiting, the other is harmed. And then competition is when two organisms are competing for the same resource. They're fighting. Number 12, describe the primary versus secondary succession. So primary and secondary succession are when plants start to grow. But the biggest difference is that primary colonization starts on new sites without any soil. Again, it starts on new sites without any soil. This usually takes place on bare rock, and because it's bare rock, it takes a lot longer than secondary succession. We have bare rock whenever volcanoes erupt or when glaciers start retreating. Again, that's just bare rock, there's no soil. And then we have pioneer species that come and help break up that rock. That's going to be the lichen and the moss. They're going to eat up the rock, and from that, they're going to cause material that can turn into soil. Secondary succession, however, is colonization of sites with soil. So there's already soil there, and that's because there was already plant life there. There was already a habitat there. But because of some disaster, some disturbance, they lost all their plants, so they have to start all over again. Those disturbances can be number 13's answer. It could be forest fires, deforestation. It could also be floods or tornadoes. Or it could be overplowing or overharvesting. So again, anytime something happens where it takes out the plant life there, we're going to start growing that again with secondary succession. So that's all I wanted to talk about for units 2 and 3. I'll make a video for the rest of the units next.